you were going to make a list of downtrodden programs in Power 5 football, I think you'd go to Kansas first. Purdue would be on the list very shortly after that. Virginia would show up at some point not too long after you commenced that project. Virginia with a once proud program there in the ACC, looking for Bronco Mendenhall to reestablish things, and he definitely spoke to that today at ACC Media Days. We bring in Matt Trogdon from Streaking the Lawn. It's the SB Nation platform for UVA athletics. Matt, I appreciate you coming on board here.
Thanks a lot, Mark. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, so Bronco Mendenhall, obviously not used to losing. 11 successful seasons at BYU, took a 2-10 team to the field last year. That was basically expected, and it was what we've seen out of Virginia in recent years. A lot of mistakes, a lot of games in which they almost pulled off upsets, a la the Louisville game at home. Your thoughts about what you took in from the second-year head coach today?
Man, what I heard was a lot what I expected. I mean, Bronco's been very candid about this process since he started. I think he was surprised at just how steep of a hill he has to climb to get this program back to where he wants it to be. But you know, he's been pretty optimistic throughout the offseason. Everything we've been hearing has been positive. You know, the players are working hard, the team's working hard. I'm sure that's the same thing you hear at every program across the country. Anything I heard from him today.
You know, I mentioned a couple other programs that have been knocked down to the lower portions of their respective leagues, but the situation at Virginia, because of the high school football that's played there, I would think would be a lot more hopeful than a few of the Power Fives that are surrounded by heavyweights but have a wasteland of high school football talent. There's a recruiting base there that just needs to be tapped there for Virginia.
Yeah, there are some interesting challenges, and you know, since I've been a Virginia fan, Virginia follower, I've seen 4 head coaches, and they've each approached it a little bit differently. Bronco's got a tough task. I mean, he only has one guy on the staff, Marcus Hagans, who is an East Coast guy. All of his other assistants, you know, mostly have west of the Mississippi experience, and so I think it took them. They admitted it took them a year or so to get the lay of the land recruiting wise. You know, the other challenge with Virginia is always going to be academics. The requirements at UVA are stricter than they are at certain places, and so that limits the possible talent pool. What I've seen from Bronco so far is be targeting schools that make sense if you think about the profile of the just average UVA student. So the success that they've had, which has been limited in the Mid-Atlantic so far, has been at some of your private schools, some of your Catholic schools, places like that. And so that's interesting. You know, Mike London, the previous coach, had a lot of success recruiting high schools all over the state of Virginia. Broncos staff hasn't had that success yet. It's hard, of course, when you're selling 8 losing seasons in 9 years, and it's hard when you know your primary rival, Virginia Tech, has had much more success, you know, over the last decades, and with Carolina on the rise and Duke on the rise, Penn State resurging, Maryland kind of coming back. It's going to be hard for them to find the talent, even though the talent is there.
I think there's one thing in play here is that Bronco is used to recruiting challenges. It was a much different situation at BYU, but he did have to overcome a number of recruiting issues because of the type of school that he was recruiting to and the lack of a conference tie-in. Kurt Benkert is your quarterback, one of the few returning quarterbacks in the ACC. Had a pretty nice stat line with 21 touchdowns, 11 picks, and 56% completion percentage. Really had a light-up game against the Duke in the one ACC win. Some struggles down the stretch and throwing multiple picks a few different times in the Virginia Tech game was a bit ugly. But your thoughts about Benkert, and then who would hit the field if something would happen to him?
Yeah, so Benkert is the story this year for Virginia. I mean, it all starts with him. If he stays healthy, then the team has a chance to take a couple steps forward. Maybe win 4 or 5 games, maybe have a peak at a 6. We'll see. If he gets hurt, it could be another ugly year. in the Connecticut game last season, and most fans didn't realize that. And he really, after he had a great game against Central Michigan, a great game against Duke. After that, though, he really kind of fell off. He had 11 interceptions, as you mentioned. I think 5 or 6 of those came in the fourth quarter of games that Virginia was winning. Virginia had 5 games last year where they had fourth quarter leads. They lost the heartbreaker to Louisville. They lost the heartbreaker to Connecticut. And then Kurt threw 2 picks back to back against Wake Forest, where they really kind of let that one slip out. So he is, in my opinion, the most physically talented quarterback that Virginia's had since Marcus Hagan in 2005, just head and shoulders above the other guys that have come through. And you could see, I mean, he has plus arm strength that really came out in a lot of the games. Central Michigan, I mean, he was just throwing darts and bombs all over the field. It was amazing. With him, it's a matter of consistency. With him, it's also a matter of improving his pocket presence. So he is, he's the number one story. He's the one we'll all be watching.
Matt Trogdon joining us from Streaking the Lawn. It's the Virginia platform on SB Nation, talking Cavaliers as ACC Media Days concludes in just a few hours, and we head toward fall camp. Quinn Blanding is a player, obviously, who's one of the very best in the nation. Despite this dry spell for the program, this program typically produces NFL-type outside linebackers, DNs, guys in the secondary, and Quinn Blanding, 118 tackles last year, just the next in line.
Yeah, so Quinn has been a tremendous player for us. Micah Kaiser has been a tremendous player for us. With the two of them, you really have a strength kind of up in the middle of the defense, and you really have 2 guys that can get to anywhere. For Virginia, it's just been, can you find anybody else to help them out? So they've got Jordan Mack, who was a nice piece as a true freshman last year. He was an outside linebacker. They moved him he cross-trained at inside in the spring. He's a little bit smaller, so that'll be interesting to see how that turns out. They took their number 1 corner on Thornhill, and they moved him to safety. So he and Quinn will play next to each other. And then they have 2 guys coming off of injury. Tim Harris, who is a widely regarded cornerback, shoulder injury. He would have been a starter at corner. And then Malcolm Cook looked to be a starter at outside linebacker. And then he went down with I believe it was a heart condition. And so both of those guys will be back this year. So that's good. But then, when you're also counting on guys coming back from injury and from medical issues, it's always a little bit tenuous. So for the time being, it's the Quinn and Micah show. And then Andrew Brown, defensive end, also another kind of all-world recruit in the 2014 class. Those are the 3 horses. And then it's just a matter of because those guys are all seniors, and this is their last rodeo.
Yeah, with Andrew Brown, a productive season there in 2016 with 13 tackles for loss and 6 sacks. You mentioned the 2 defensive backs, Thornhill and Mack, both pretty productive, 45 and 40 tackles there. So there are guys that made plays coming back to the defense. Let's get back to, and I'll edit this one, Matt. I was going to hit you up on the backup quarterback situation.
Okay.
So, Matt, in replacing Ben Kurt, hopefully that's not going to be a situation. Hopefully you're winning games by so much that the backup quarterback gets to play. But other than that, you don't want to see this guy. But that's kind of the deal with the backup quarterback. He goes from being the most forgotten guy in the field to suddenly the most important guy 1 play away. So how does it look behind Ben Kurt at this point?
Ooh, it's ugly. It's so Matt Johns was senior backup quarterback last year, so we lost him. Connor Brewer was the 3rd string. We lost him as well. He was also senior. Virginia lost 2 quarterbacks in the offseason. Sonny Abramson, who would have been a redshirt freshman this year, and then Marvin Zanders, who was supposed to be a transfer quarterback coming in from Missouri, who many folks as being the number 2. He didn't clear admission, so he wasn't able to join the program. So Virginia only has 3 scholarship quarterbacks on the roster. Ben Kurt is your number 1 guy. Thought would be number 2. Devontae Cross has actually been cross training at wide receiver, and it looks like that's where they're going to keep him, because today Bronco Mendenhall said that if that true freshman Lindell Stone is likely to be our number 2 quarterback, and that he doesn't see him taking a red shirt this season. So that was a bit of a surprise. Pretty well regarded. He's a Texas native, played up at Woodbury Forest, which is right down the road from Charlottesville, and that's a school that UVA hopes to recruit more successfully in the future. Stone he's kind of known as being a heady player. I don't know that he necessarily meets the dual threat mold that Bronco has been looking for, but it appears that he will get some opportunities here this fall. But Virginia fans definitely should be holding their breath that Kurt stays healthy.
Yes, Stone, a top 30 quarterback according to 247 Sports, top 20 player in Virginia, 6'2", 205, had 15 offers from some pretty decent Power 5 programs on his resume. So hopefully he sees the field a little bit later in his career. So, Matt, while we stay in the recruiting trail, we'll hit you up for the latest in regards to where Bronco has this program headed. We see DJ Brown's a defensive back. He was a hard commit here just very recently, and you've got a transfer out of Texas at quarterback. What's the latest in the recruiting trail?
Virginia's put together a relatively solid class wise. I think they're up to 19 or 20 commitments for this coming cycle, which is really helpful to them, because they get to concentrate on just a handful of guys the rest of the way. Last year's class, I think, was ranked something like 55th or 56th in the 24/7 Sports Composite. I would look for this year's class to be similar, maybe a little bit better. Of classes, rankings-wise, that we were seeing under Al Groh or under Mike London, those classes were much more highly regarded. But Virginia has always suffered from an attrition problem. And so, both Al and Mike brought in a lot of studs, who weren't able to stay in school. And Bronco, I think, has gone out and looking for academic fits. He's looking for kids who are going to be able to stay eligible all 4 years, who he should be able to develop. And then I think he's going to try to sprinkle in some top end talent where he can. Outside linebacker looks like a strength for this class. They have Noah Taylor, a kid out of Maryland, and then Javar Garrett, a kid from New Jersey. Both of those guys are pretty highly regarded. They've already gone out and gotten 5 commitments from offensive linemen, which Bronco identified early on as being the number 1 kind of thing that needed to be fixed in the program. So he's making some headway there, at least towards building the cupboard back. And I think they have 2 wide receivers that they've signed. The name that we're all going to be watching in the fall is Ronnie Walker. He is a running back out of Hopewell, Virginia. He's kind of a borderline high 3-star, low 4-star guy. Likes UVA quite a bit, has been to Charlottesville quite a bit, and we're hoping that if Virginia can get off to a hot start, it will be enough to kind of push him to make the commit. That would be a big one for Bronco and his staff.
Man, when I think Virginia football, I think 8-4, 7-5, because that's kind of what I grew up with, and that's what I remember from most of the 90s and early 2000s. You mentioned the 8 out of 9 losing seasons, and as I look at it here, it's been since 2004 that the Cavaliers showed up in the final AP top 25. So this has been a program that's been in a dry spell now for a long time. Your thoughts about the coming season and best case scenario from a reasonable fashion, knowing that, hey, despite the emergence that we expect out of Miami, that we have seen Georgia Tech and Duke in ACC championship games in recent years, and Pitt emerged to a certain extent. And then I don't want to take you in the wrong direction, but maybe some big concerns that you have that need to be cleared up very soon.
Yeah, absolutely. think Virginia's ceiling is probably somewhere around 5 or 6 games, 5 or 6 wins. I look at the schedule. To be able to figure out a way they can find 6, but it's going to take at least one upset to do that. Virginia, in order to get back to winning seasons, has to do something that it hasn't really done consistently for a decade, and that is win the games that it should win. So if you look at that schedule, they should beat William and Mary. They should beat Connecticut. They should beat Boston College. You would like to think that they can beat Indiana and Duke at home. Those are the types of games that they need to win to take a step forward. Those are also the types of games that they haven't won consistently over the years. If somehow you're fortunate enough to get all of those 5, then you have to hope that they can find a 6th somewhere. I think unfortunately for UVA, they made a coaching change maybe a little bit late. I think they might have let the previous coaching staff stick around a year or two too long. The ACC Coastal Division, 2 or 3 or 4 years ago was not as solid as it is now. I used to say that it was kind of like a dressing shaker. You could shake it up and it would be pretty easy to go from the bottom to the top. Now I think it's a little bit harder because so many of the teams are on the rise at the same time, and Virginia's behind. So they just have to keep trying to take as many steps as they can, as consistently as they can. I think it's a tough hill. Biggest concern for the year easily is going to be the offensive line. So I mentioned that. Through a combination of some spotty recruiting and and combined with some really bad injury luck, Virginia, Bronco Mendenhall came to UVA with the cupboard almost bare at offensive line. They had, in the spring, they only had 6 scholarship offensive linemen available. I think they're bringing in 7 this fall, which will double the number of scholarship linemen on the roster, and then they already have 5 for next fall. Last year they only played 7 guys consistently, and the offensive line was really what held them back a lot of the year. So they've got to find a rotation that can protect Ben Kurt. And that can open up some holes for an interesting stable of running backs. But they have 3 guys: Jack English, Jack McDonald, and Jake Filer, who played significant minutes last year. Then I would look for 2 transfers to start at right guard and right tackle. And then after that, they have 1 guy left on the roster, RJ Proctor, who saw some significant time. But other than that, no one else. They have 16 linemen on the roster. Only 6 of them have played legitimate college football minutes. So it's a huge question mark for the team. It'd be the story for a couple of years, I think.
Offensive line. We seem to talk a lot offensive line during these previews in the summer because we don't know who the players are. Most fans forget about them. They know the 4th wide receiver, but they don't know the best offensive lineman on the field. But as a group, I would argue the most important unit. It's got to have chemistry. It's got to have depth. It's got to have guys that are versatile and can move spots from center to guard, et cetera, et cetera. So it's mighty important. And with the defensive line play that we've seen in this league, although most of it that has gained attention has been on the other side of the conference, but still, even in your own division, there have been some serious edge rushers and D tackles that have moved on to the next level. So you've got to be stout up front. Matt Trogdon from Streaking the Lawn. It's Virginia's platform on SB Nation joins us to break down the Cavaliers. Matt, we appreciate the time.
Thanks, Mark. This was a lot of fun.